Welcome to today's demonstration of an MES operational data store. We welcome back those of you that also attended the session in September, Real Outcomes, Real Fast, an ODS platform for MES modernization. Before we get the demonstration started, let me remind you to ask questions. There's a Q&A window. Just like the last webcast, we will respond at the end of the demonstration to as many questions as possible. You will also receive a follow-up as before with the answers to those questions. Today, I'll provide a brief overview of our recent experience with the MES ODS. Gary will lead you through the demonstration, and Damon Feldman will follow with a review of how the ODS aligns with the broader MES architecture. So just a little bit of background to remind you, MarkLogic has experience in this area. We are the platform for healthcare.gov. We have been for 8 years. Last year and this year, we will be doing open enrollment in healthcare.gov in the cloud. We process 8,000 transactions a second and have over 300,000 concurrent users. CMS also, as a result of this engagement, has entered into an ELA with MarkLogic. In addition, we also have 3 states that are basically have selected us where we have implemented or are implementing the ODS. We have a southeastern state who completed an ODS pilot in less than 90 days. And that was the model that established a pattern for the ODS that they use today. New Mexico has built an ODS for MES that will serve as the data hub not only for Medicaid, but for all of HHS. And Georgia is our newest client, and they started this year. So there are benefits of doing an ODS and doing an ODS first. You get results in months, not years, quality data, and a simplified architecture. So I'm going to do a quick intro for Gary before he starts his demonstration. Gary's demonstration will show you the ease in which you can very quickly ingest, model, curate, and search data from multiple data sources. First, Gary ingests claims, beneficiary, and provider data sources into our multi-model data hub. This includes XML, CSV, and binary data. We'll transition to harmonization and curation of the ingested data and show a 360-degree view of our beneficiary. Gary will master the data. You'll see how he deduplicates records and automates the mapping rules. We'll dive into security and see how the MarkLogic ODS was built for handling sensitive data in mind for solutions such as our clients in the intelligence community and health and human services. This includes data element security, data masking, and redaction, and de-identification of data. Throughout the demo, you'll see the built-in MarkLogic Enterprise search features in action. We'll also demonstrate various ways the data is accessed, including through Power BI, or you could use any BI. We've chosen Power BI for the demonstration, an application, or through API calls. So let me introduce Gary Katz. Gary is the Senior Solution Manager. He has worked with our Medicaid team the last 4 years. Prior to joining us, he worked with competitive products, including those that were leaders in the MDM field. He has great MarkLogic and industry knowledge. Gary?
Thank you, Tom. Okay, I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. Here we go. So before we begin the demo, I want to very quickly give an overview of how a MarkLogic data hub aligns with an operational data store. When we talk about operational data stores, they tend to be comprised of multiple different capabilities: to store data, to cleanse data, to master data, to make data available to downstream consumers from different modules. And with MarkLogic Data Hub, we have all of these different capabilities built directly into the hub. And I want to note, these are not different products under the MarkLogic umbrella. These are one deployable capability, one very tightly integrated deployable that has all of these capabilities built directly in, that enables us to provide a next-generation ODS much more effectively and allow you to focus on the data integration task as opposed to having to focus on the systems integration task of stitching together different software tools before you get to even touch the data. With MarkLogic, you can immediately begin working on the data knowing that you have all of the systems capability very tightly integrated and available inside of the MarkLogic Data Hub. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and Tom touched on what we're going to see in today's demonstration. We have 3 different types of data. We have claims data, beneficiary data, and provider data. And we're going to put this all inside of the MarkLogic Data Hub, and we're going to evaluate these different steps throughout: the ingestion and modeling, curation of data, mastering, and we're going to see security and search sort of as a common theme throughout this demonstration. And then, of course, downstream consumption. How do I access the data and BI tools? How can I access the security capabilities to enable sharing of the data? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log into my MarkLogic Envision environment. I'm going to log in as Dr. Smith, so I'm seeing security built directly in as we speak. Let's see. And my MarkLogic Envision environment has a Connect tab. The Connect tab allows for me to describe what my business environment is, right? So a business steward or a data steward can work directly inside of here and define what we describe as entities and relationships. In this case, we have an entity, for instance, called a member, and I'm going to simply make this more readable to those on the webinar. Member has the PII data for members. We have claims that we've just defined as entities. So these are FHIR claims, including the ICD-10 diagnosis code, as well as the diagnosis description and other pertinent information that you would see on a CMS form 1500 or within the Z37. We have a claim item, which we would find inside of a claim. Basically, multiple different providers can work within one individual claim document. And of course, we have providers that are also listed. We can see their relevant information in here, including their NPI number. And of course, we've got relationships between different entities. So members are connected to claims because members have claims have claim items have providers, and members notably have dependents, so they sort of point to themselves. And that's going to be important later when we discuss part of our mastering scenario. Now, what's important here is we don't have any complex ERD diagrams in order to get this model. What MarkLogic is doing is we're providing a simple mechanism to define what information and relationships are important to you. And MarkLogic is on the back end representing this inside of the Data Hub so that you can begin loading data. So with that, let's jump to our Data Hub Quick Start. Now, I've actually gone and loaded some data in so that we don't have to stare and watch data load as we are on this webinar. But you can see that we have something called flows. Now, flows are a series of steps that enable you to perform a particular task. So you can see that we have a flow for claims, for Curium data set, for an MMIS data set, and for provider data. We also have a flow for mastering, which we're going to come back to later. But for a moment, let's explore, for instance, the Curium data set. So as I open the Curium data set, I can see that I have 2 steps, one an ingestion step and another a mapping step. The ingestion step allows for me to describe where does my data live, what form does my data take. In this case, Curium is an XML format, so we specify XML. And notably, MarkLogic is a multi-model database. We can accept any and all data into the MarkLogic Data Hub. So if it's XML, we'll pull out XML. If it's CSV, we'll pull out CSV. If it's JSON, we'll pull in JSON, however it presents itself. And then notably, we have a mapping step. Now, the mapping step is where we align the data as it presents itself, the source data, in this case, Curium XML, and we map it into that entity that we defined in the Envision environment. And this is part of the curation. Where does the data live? How do we get it and access it? And any operations we might choose to standardize it or cleanse it at this point, we can do and take place. So again, notably, Curium is an XML standard. We're accessing that data in an XML-like fashion that makes sense for XML. For CSV data, we would pull it in a way that makes sense for CSV. So with that, we have data in flows that we've incorporated into MarkLogic, doing nothing more than loading the data and performing some rough standardization. Let's start exploring and seeing what we can find. So I'm going to jump into our Explore tab. And I want to note, just by way of reference, at this point, we've just looked at ingestion and model, right? We're now going to look towards looking at that 360-degree view and how we can get a fuller picture of what we've loaded. So I'm going to run an empty query into our Explorer, which is going to bring me my entire map of everything that we have, looking at it in a paginated way. So showing the first 10 results and the associated relationships. Now I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see we've got all of our different providers. We have claims data. We have fire claims and members. How do I find something that's relevant and interesting? So let's find something about anything involving COVID-19. So I'm going to use MarkLogic's built-in search capabilities. I'm going to issue a search for COVID-19. And I'm going to close this map up just so that we can see the full picture. And I can zoom in at this point on any one of these to get an idea of, well, what am I looking at? So I can see that I have a particular claim right here that is connected. I can see the diagnosis, the ICD-10 diagnosis code, the diagnosis description for COVID-19, where the virus wasn't identified, some other relevant information that's connected to it, such as the patient number. I can look and see the relationship to the actual patient. So this is dealing with Dreddy Moxham. And I should note, by the way, we're logged in as Dr. Smith. If I were logged in as someone who didn't have these credentials, the PII data, for instance, for someone who wasn't credentialed, simply wouldn't show. If I were to look at one of these claim items, I could see the relevant information that's associated with this particular claim. But if I want to get a fuller picture of Dreddy, right, if I want to get a better idea of what's really going on with Dreddy, I can expand this out and start looking at other claims that this individual may have. So now I can see, oh, Dreddy has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other claims, and I can expand out each of these as well. And what's important here is that I can get a fuller picture now of one individual and their particular graph to get that 360-degree view, having done nothing more than load data into MarkLogic using a model that was relevant to the business that I'm looking at, in this case, claims data and member data and provider data. So what happens, however, if I don't have data that's quite so clean? What happens if I don't have data that is quite so straightforward? So at this point, I want to do another search. Let's search for someone named Drindy. Now, if I hone in on Drindy, I'm going to pull up this map. I'm going to see some interesting things. Let me make this a little bigger so the folks can see it. So I'm going to click on Drindy here on this node, and I see I have Drindy Day, and she has a particular social security number, and that's fine, and she lives at a particular address. And notice that her name is spelled with an I at the end of Drindy. I have another Drindy where it's spelled with a Y, same social security number, and same address. It seems like it's reasonably the same person. And I have one up here called Day, where I have Day Drindy. So the first name and the last name have been transposed. Okay, same social security number, same address. So to the human eye, it's reasonable to infer that this is probably the same person. I also see that Drindy, let me move this map here a little bit so it's a little easier to read, has dependent relationships to someone named Nuno. So I click on Nuno. I see that Nuno has a particular social security number and same address. Okay, so they live together. And I see another Nuno Day Jr., with a different social security number, but the same address. So this is, without knowing anything further, a husband and a son who are all on Drindy's plan. So, okay, these are different people. And notably, they are referenced as different people. We haven't done any mastering yet. So that's helpful. So we have some interesting personalities to work with as we look at, let's see another example that may not be quite as easy. Let's look at Mohammed. So as I search on Mohammed, and I'm going to expand this graph out so you can see it a little better. There we go. I have multiple different Mohammeds here. I have a Mohammed who has a particular social security number, 1191 as the end. Mohammed spelled in a particular way. I have another representation of Mohammed, also Mehmet, same social security, similar address. Likewise, note the address is slightly different. Social security number is the same, spelled slightly differently. And Mohammed, of course, is attached to a couple different claims. And I also have Mohammed over here. So I have Mohammed where it appears that this is the same person, but the Social Security number is now off by 1 digit. So without having done any mastering capabilities, it appears that I have 4 different Mohammeds when I think that reasonably we might believe that, in fact, we have perhaps 1. Lastly, and I want to show this example, I want to look at one other, which we'll come back to later. Help. And I have 3 different folks, 3 different Johns, if you will. John here, Jon, John Pelteheller with a particular social. I have another John, slightly different social, but the same address data. And I have, another John, different social, and same address data. So these appear like they could be different people, but this is admittedly more floppy data, but it's squishy. I don't quite know. So with that, we've explored some data. We've looked at the 360-degree view in a pre-mastering capacity. I do want to show, we'll show that. Let's jump straight into the mastering component. So now I have this mastering flow. I'm going to run this mastering flow. Let's jump in there and I'll run it here. I'm going to run both of these steps. And while this is running, let's talk about what these 2 steps are doing. I have a matching step and I have a merging step. My matching step basically allows for me to define what scores or weights do I want to give to particular attributes of identity data. In this case, it's about members. So we're looking at things like Social Security numbers and address data and last names and dates of birth, in the different components, year of birth, month of birth, day of birth. And then we have match thresholds. So these are the weights or the thresholds, if you will, by which we decide we want to match explicitly on this, or perhaps we've got a gray area for human review where it didn't quite make it to 60, but it looks kind of close. So we've defined one called human review. This will be important after mastering is done. Finished with errors. Okay. I'm going to jump straight to, because I'm not sure what just happened, a recording that I have of this piece. And we're going to push this part through. Something just happened on my end.
In this segment, we're going to explore the benefits of mastering data in order to improve the quality of the data that's ultimately leveraged by Medicaid systems. And we're also going to explore this via MarkLogic search capabilities. So, back to our Envision environment. In our prior example, where we explored a 360-degree view of a person, everything was nice and clean. We had one person with multiple claims and all of the claim line items. But what happens if we have different representations of what are ultimately the same person? So in this case, I've done a search for someone named Drindy. Now, I'm going to click on Drindy's node here, and we're going to see that Drindy has a particular Social Security number. She has a spelling with D-R-I-N-D-I at the end. There's another Drindy down here spelled slightly differently, Drindy Day, same social, spelled with a Y. We also have a third Drindy who has the first name and the last name transposed, same social, and consistent address data. So it appears this is all talking about one person. We also have 2 different Nunos, one Nuno Day with a particular Social Security number, and a Nuno Day Jr. with a different Social Security number. So this graph itself suggests that we're in fact dealing with 3 people, one Drindy and 2 separate Nunos, the father and son. With that, let's look at another example that's perhaps even a little harder. Let's look at Mohammed. Now, Mohammed's graph is unique because there are multiple different ways, certainly, to represent the name Mohammed, such as Met. And we can see that we've got 1, 2, another Mohammed here, and another Mohammed, 3 Mohammeds in this graph, and they all have the same social. But now we have a Mohammed down here who has a different social that's not that far off from the socials of the other. And what makes this unique and more difficult isn't actually the name. It's the fact that the Social Security numbers are different, and yet it's an understandable and perhaps reasonable typo that someone may have misentered that number. So if we were to look at this graph on its surface, we'd think that we have 4 different Mohammeds, when in fact the graph to the human eye would suggest that we have 1. Now we could leave this as it is and explore it at its surface level, but for analytics purposes downstream and reporting, we'd like to consolidate this so that we know that we have one single version of truth. So if we go back to MarkLogic's Data Hub, recall that we have a mastering flow. Now I'm going to run this flow so that we can see what takes place. There we go. Click Run. And while this is running, let's go inside and explore what it's doing. Here we go. Mastering consists of a match step and a merge step. Now, the match step allows for us to put specific weights on different attributes for matching. So for person matching, Social Security number does bear a lot of weight. And then we give other weights based off of last name and address data and other relevant information so that we can ultimately reach a couple different thresholds. One where we decide we believe that the weight threshold is sufficient to automatically merge them. And in this case, MarkLogic has done something unique to match to mastering systems. We've created another threshold called human review, which is, it's kind of close, but we want someone in the loop to be able to confirm before we match these that these are in fact the same person, because language is ambiguous with infinite possibilities for possibilities. So let's get a human in to look at it. So our merge step consists of how we define what the merges will look like. And notably, in this example, we have a different source, the MES source, carrying more weight on Social Security number than the Curum source. Now, this is important because for a mastered record, we can put different information into the mastered record based on which source it came from. So, simply put, if I'm mastering records about an individual and I have banking information and human resources information, I might trust the financials out of the banking information more than I trust the financials out of the human resources system. So therefore, I give a higher weight to one system for a particular type of data than another. And that's exactly what we've done here by putting the weight for MES higher than the weight for Curum, arbitrarily for demonstrative purposes, but completely and totally configurable inside of MarkLogic. So now, if I go back to our Envision environment, and I search on Mohammed, you'll note that now I have one Mohammed with his associated claims and claim items. I can see the entire history of how we reached this individual record. So I can see all of the merging that took place. So I have the full lineage and I have full governance here, so I can always revert back associated with this record. Same for Drindy. Let me search again for our Drindy example. As I see Drindy, I see that I have one Drindy who's right here with all of her other records. I have the full lineage associated with this record. But notably, I also have one Nuno. And recall in our example with Nuno that we thought that Nuno was 2 different people. So in MarkLogic, I also have the capability to do something that is unique to MarkLogic more easily than other systems, which is I can simply unmerge. And I'm going to click on merge. I'm going to force the unmerge, and now I have back my 2 Nunos the way that they should be, because mastering is not always perfect, and therefore we want the ability to pull out records that to make them better quality. And in this case, this was the appropriate action. Lastly, let me refresh my Explorer. So I believe we're also going to have some notifications. So if I look inside here, recall that in our match thresholds, we had a human review threshold. And what this allows us to do is examine records that are believed to be close and make a determination about should we match them. So for each of these rows that we're looking at, for Jonathan Pelteheller and John Pelteheller and another John Pelteheller, all of the red represents where information might be slightly different between these 3 records. And MarkLogic is asking us, do we want to merge this record or block this match? And in this case, It appears to be a valid record, so I'm going to merge it. The merge is complete. I'm going to go back to Explore. I'm going to search on Peltiheller. And I see Jonathan. As I look at this record, I have John, Jonathan, and John all fully merged, and of course, with all of the history that these records were merged within. In this segment, we're going to be exploring another one of MarkLogic's security capabilities called redaction. And we're going to demonstrate this through a data as a service API that we've put together that also leverages MarkLogic's search capabilities. So in our scenario, we want to be able to expose relevant data to state agencies or public health monitoring groups who are interested in things about COVID-19 or something having to deal with lung. So we issue a query to MarkLogic that includes the search terms COVID-19 or lung. And I'm going to execute this. I'm going to log in as Dr. Smith, who has redaction privileges. And I'm going to get a set of results back showing that Dr. Smith is a redaction user. And I'm also going to see other information down here, such as Social Security data or full name data that has been obfuscated or masked. The Social Security number does not contain any of the relevant data except for the last 4 digits. The full name has been completely masked, as has the user ID been masked. So we can put these different techniques and masking capabilities on a field-by-field level, depending on what type of information you wish to share outside of your organization to approved redaction users. Whereas, let's say I were logging in as another user. Let's say this time I'm going to be Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is not a redaction user, does not have the redaction permission, and therefore no data is shown. In this segment, we're going to review how to expose information from the MarkLogic Data Hub to other apps and tools such as BI reporting tools. Now, I happen to have a local version of Microsoft Power BI running on my machine. Now, MarkLogic does have connectors to tools like Power BI or Tableau, but we can also expose information out via REST services so that we can reach virtually any front-end user reporting tool. And more importantly, MarkLogic is a multi-model database, and one of those capabilities allows for us to render data out into SQL-like views, because at the end of the day, most BI reporting tools rely on tabular SQL tables in order to pull data into those tools. And that's exactly what we do here, for instance, within Power BI. So I'm going to refresh data. I have 2 charts here. And we can see that we're going to start pulling out our claim item, and we're pulling out a couple different tables, member before mastering and after mastering, as well as provider data. Now, we've set up a chart to show before and after mastering counts of members via zip code. Now, keep in mind, we're dealing in a much smaller set of data in our demonstrative example. But before mastering, we had, for instance, in 30332, we had 11 different individuals. After mastering, we only had 6. So recall, these are the consolidated Drindis. These are the consolidated Mohammeds. These are the Nunos that we split up after mastering into 2 separate ones. These are the Peltihellers who we put into one individual. So you can imagine at scale how much better your analytics and reporting will be with much cleaner mastered data. Additionally, we can expose out other information. I've created a report about claims. So here we can review particular claim amounts by diagnosis codes or diagnosis descriptions. We can look at the case counts by a particular diagnosis description. We can assess by provider how many claims are being submitted to a Medicaid system. And we can analyze this through any lens we want to look at within Power BIs or Tableaus or any other BI tools exploitation capabilities, such as show me only those cases that involve COVID-19, or show me only those cases that happen to involve something involving thyroid. The tools themselves allow for this exploitation. MarkLogic simply makes this data available to these tools in the way that makes most sense for them.
So we had to jump to a backup format on that point. However, I hope that's given a bit of context for how MarkLogic can perform mastering and help to expose data in a shareable and safe way and be able to have this available to downstream consumers. Tom, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, so if you think you saw Trindi or Mohammed more than once, you're okay. We just had about a 3-minute rerun there, but like Gary said, I hope that that made sense and you were able to follow through that because there was a 3-minute overlap there. So thank you, Gary. Now I'm going to introduce Damon Feldman. Damon's a senior architect and the MarkLogic lead on healthcare.gov. He's also worked with all 3 of our MarkLogic Medicaid clients I referenced before. So Damon is going to walk you through a presentation before we get to Q&A at the end. Damon?
Oh, thanks, Tom. Hello, everybody. So this is point-to-point architecture. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a couple of architectures and try to take what Gary was showing, right? Because we saw, I hope clearly in a very understandable way, how we go through the phases, right? We ingest the data, map it into a new format. There's some quality and cleanup that wasn't shown, and then there's the mastering, and then exposure of that data to a BI tool, exposure of that data in APIs and so on. But how do those capabilities actually fit into a Medicaid enterprise system? Why is this important in modernizing? And particularly, how we call this pattern of pulling it all into that one place, the operational data store. Where does that fit? Okay, so this is an illustration of maybe what not to do, really, sort of a simplistic way to go, point-to-point architecture, not a hub, right? The ODS is a hub and spoke method, where you would start with, actually I'll back up a slide. On the left here, start with whatever legacy systems you have, right? Could be a big mainframe that has providers and members and claims all in one place. Could be a few systems in the current environment. To get to a more modern system, which is the goal of many people now, you could go grab a new module, it's called a claims module, figure out where the relevant claims data is for that product, that off-the-shelf product, and then basically ETL it in, right? Go get another module, maybe 6 months or a year later, wire that one in. And this way, the new modern systems start to grow, and hopefully the old systems can be sort of decoupled and unwired and even turned off as the new systems come online. Now, in a data world, right, our world that we're doing with a few people is focused on how the data moves to do this. So one way to go, and like I said, we don't recommend this, is to just ETL it from the old to the new until you build up enough new systems with enough ETL, right? Actually, and I get in there. Now, as soon as you have 2 of them, right, you have claims and eligibility here. On the right, you have more transforms because these 2 systems in the new world also have to communicate with each other. On the left, we have ETL that got us from the old world into the new world, and on the right is some kind of a ESB or a microservice or architecture or some kind of API universe that allows these to talk to each other and also keep each other up to date, right? Now, as this grows, and you have both your migration path and your modernized path, you get more modules, maybe 5, 6, 7 modules, and they all bring with them more data movement, more data transform, and it becomes messy. It becomes hard to, the word we often use is govern. It's hard to know what got transformed where it ultimately came from, what system is feeding into what system, how data has been changed, how it's being changed today, and then when there's a new release or an upgrade, how it's being changed tomorrow, and It's a lot of things like that. So what we recommend instead is a hub and spoke model. MarkLogic's core engineering group produces something called the MarkLogic Data Hub, right? That's what we use when we're working with states to build an ODS, or we supply to systems integrators and our partners to build an ODS. And here's a alternate diagram, right? We still have the same systems on the left. We have these legacy systems and mainframes. We want to minimize the transform. MarkLogic doesn't do ETL. It does something more common in the NoSQL world, ELT. We extract it from the old systems, load it right into MarkLogic as is, right? Gary was showing that. You can pull in the XML record from a Curum system, the CSV record from some other MMIS system. You can pull in JSON records. You can pull in all kinds of things. We pull it all in and load it as is. That way we don't lose the data. We don't reject data. The system doesn't break because the format was wrong. And then we take that and we use those mappings that Gary was showing, and we transform it into more of a core model. One of the things that we say to people is a big advantage of having this is you have a core model. You have your own core model that is built to serve your strategic needs, right? Whatever that might be is going to guide how you want to model your data rather than having to deal with and become more and more tightly linked to the various module vendors' data schemas. So this is the beginning. And I like this part of the slide right here because notice there's no new modules yet, right? This work can actually be done early to kind of get your feet under you. And I think everyone we've worked with has done that, has started with the data, started to model the data, think about the data, build the data extracts and the overnight batch processes to keep the data up to date, or to build, in one case, Kafka, other ways to go, a real-time flow into this operational store. All right, so you got good data. That's great. And, well, as you might expect, you now push that data out into the various modern components, right? And that's the CMS way, is to have componentized modules that form the new world. And these don't all show up at once. Same thing. You might procure one or two with one phase or an RFP, and then another one later, and another one later. But over time, more and more of them come online, and they're consuming this standard that you have developed to say, this is what my data looks like. You, third-party liability vendor, your job as you come in here is to integrate into our core model so that you're compatible with everything. And those arrows on the right are bidirectional, right? So you've got the migration, and then you've got the feeding of those systems so that their databases become fully populated from the old world. But then on a day-to-day basis, certain changes from those systems will flow back into the ODS, the operational store, and in a decoupled way, the other modules can then pick that up. One of the nice things about this is that as the things on the left are decommissioned, that doesn't break the integrations to the thing on the right. By decoupling it, as long as everyone interacts with the same data model, you can turn various things on and off, switch modules, and have that flexibility without breaking your whole architecture. Okay. So I'm going to sort of explode that, right? So the ODS is still here, but now it's bigger, and it has little boxes inside of it. This is pretty much the same things that Gary had in his diagram of the phases as you go from top to bottom. You've got the harmonization and mastering. These are a little different. So these are some of the things that take place inside of, in particular, a MarkLogic ODS. We saw a lot of it. By harmonization, we mean that mapping from the old model, or whatever kind of data was laying around, if you want to call it a data model, into the new model. Smart mastering, you saw quite a lot of that, how the system can use some scores and some rules and point-based systems to figure out what's a duplicate and then merge it together or notify people. A lot of governance in there so that people can tell what transform was applied to what when. And you saw Gary would click on something and you'd see all the things that had happened to that entity on the right, and you could trace it back to what step of what flow did it. And security. So at the top we have uniform security, really important part of governance. I think I have an illustration of that. So all of the modules that you eventually create are going to have some security, meaning you log into that system and they have their own database, and hopefully only the right things are seen by the right people based on some kind of roles. But those are going to be kind of hard-coded and built for a certain purpose for that module, whereas for your entire enterprise, a lot of other things are probably going to need other security or uniform security. So a big advantage of a centralized ODS is it's a centralized place to provide security for all the data flows, operational accesses, reporting, analytics. This one on the left, the top left, FHIR interoperability, we're seeing that more and more. People are seeing the deadline for the CMS interoperability rule come down the pike, and that requires that FHIR data be interchanged with a certain scope of data in a certain way. And who's allowed to see what is important. And also, having an ODS is important. Having a place where these new data requirements or these new systems can get their data is important. One of the states I'm thinking of just within the past few weeks found, I think it was a child welfare group who needed a data export. So they were able to very quickly use the ODS they already had data in a standard format, and adapt to this new requirement and get that data out there without rebuilding security, without putting a new middle tier in place, and without having to sort of build a whole new complicated system. So I guess at the end of the day, it's really about being a centralized model where you get benefit by doing things once. So that's sort of where the thing Gary showed fits into the big picture. I just want to summarize a little bit what it is about MarkLogic as a technology and as a company, because we also have a lot of knowledge and skill in this area as we do this more and more. What makes us uniquely well suited to have the central, secure, governed store, right? So you saw data modeling, right? You saw the claims and claim lines providers in a little model on an image, and you don't have to use that little image drawer, but you can build a model, and that allows you to own and govern your model and version it and know what form your data is in at any given time. The harmonization and mapping, right, that's built in, and again, it traces the lineage and history of data by associating the mappings with the things that have happened to the data over time. We saw built-in mastering. I've been to the Gartner Master Data Management Conference. It wasn't Master Data. That was one track of about 4 in one of their conferences. And I've talked to all their people and dug into it quite a lot. For some reason, MDM mastering efforts often fail, and MarkLogic has really built in a very simple, effective way of deduplicating your data for the purposes of integration so that you don't have duplicates and bad data. Data quality, as you map the data, you can also either reject it or take a known bad data format and clean it up into a good data format. And this means that the central data in that hub becomes kind of clean and reliable and consistent across all users. So you don't have one ETL job to one module that reports, you had claims like this, and then your eligibility system has other ETL and other logic, and it's reporting something totally different because it's using different rules, right? So by having it all centralized, you have centralized clean data that looks the same. Also for analytics. Security, I mentioned quite a bit. And then I think you saw whenever Gary would click on an entity, like a person, here's what happened to it. It was mapped at this time using this mapping, and then it was mastered and combined with these two, and you know what's happened over time. And then I'll say something, not only the technology, but also throw in here, as a team, we are working with our partners, systems integrators and states directly, and building up more and more Medicaid-related stuff. And that's also a goal of CMS, right? The ability to leverage the things that have happened in other places. So to the extent that you're following this pattern, you're kind of reusing what's already been done. And to the extent you use data formats and rule sets and so on that are built into these MarkLogic solutions, that's also a lot of leverage. So with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Tom, and maybe we can move on to questions.
Great. Thank you, Damon. So we are done with the presentation and demonstration portion of our event. We did get questions, so what I will tell you is we will follow up with everybody with an email with the answers to the questions that we've got asked. Let me start by asking the first question. I think this should be a layup. It was asked before Damon's presentation. So, Damon, does your platform eliminate the need for ETLs?
Yes and no. It eliminates a whole lot of it. Let me go back here. If I can hit that button. There we go. So this kind of an approach has all these red boxes, which are basically some kind of transform. So I said we do ELT, and we minimize the transform both in terms of data movement in the migration phase and transform in the the real-time data flows and future phase. But what's not shown here, and I think is really important, our data model is fundamentally an API-like model, right? A lot of times it's a FHIR-inspired model or inspired by some other standard. So we don't have a relational model and a message model and then an operational model and then an analytic model. We do the transforms one time and put it into one good model. And outside the scope of this presentation, we provide a couple of data lenses, right? When you saw the business intelligence views with Power BI, that was really looking at a relational data lens on top of the data rather than doing a big ETL job to a downstream data warehouse where everything's converted to a star schema. So we vastly reduce the amount of transformations, and we do loading as is to keep it all, and then we do the transform once we have the data, but a lot less of it. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you, Damon. So I have a couple questions I'm going to try to combine. One in your demo, I saw a reference to the FHIR claim, and can you work with FHIR data? Now that's part of the first question. Let me also kind of expand. The other question we have is, what database and API management are used for the final rule, of course, FHIR? So, Damon, can you take a shot at that one?
I missed it a little bit. What is it about API I'm sorry, could you just say that again?
What database and API management are used for final rule?
So the database is our database, and as I say, we store data in JSON natively, and the final rule requires JSON, a certain kind of JSON, to be produced. So we store things in the format that the interoperability rule requires. Once you've done that transformation into a FHIR-like data model, it's very easy to send it out then for interoperability purposes. There's a whole other layer on top of logins, but people know how to do that. From a data perspective, we get it into FHIR format. In terms of API management, we provide APIs directly out of MarkLogic. We don't try to dictate to people the API manager they will use, right? If you're in AWS versus Google Cloud versus Azure versus on-prem, whether your partner is IBM or Oracle or Layer 7 or something, you're going to want your own API manager. But because we provide normal industry standard RESTful, typically we do a little SOAP, but mostly RESTful APIs, those fit right into the API management world. And then that API manager may also talk to other systems besides the core hub, right? Might talk to all of the various modules, for instance. So we don't dictate that, but we work with that. And I hope that answers the question. Maybe not. If not, please follow up.
Okay, all right, and we will, as I said, thank you, Damon. We will look at all these questions, of which we have many. We're not going to get all of them, but we will answer every question that's asked, send it out to the complete group. Let me go to the next question. What are the similarities and differences, Damon, that we're seeing in the 3-state MES implementations that are in progress right now?
I mean, the similarity is the pattern, right? Everybody is centralized. Everybody we work with is centralizing their data, and I think I can say that everyone is centralizing their data as a first step and getting an early start on data before they bring on the modules. So when the module comes on, the data store has already been updated with the subset of data needed. If you're going to bring on claims first, then you would get the claims data into the ODS first. So it's sort of an incremental approach. It's obviously highly data-centric, and that's common to everyone. Differences, I mean, there's differences in team structure and so on. Some states have a very strong influence and kind of do a lot of their own technology with their own people. Some delegate much more fully to a systems integrator. But I would say the biggest difference is probably where people start. One state we're working with has started with getting a lot of the data prepped into the ODS and then handing it off to the analytical team. They have a whole separate contract for analytical. So just by the way they've contracted, they sort of have to push all that data over to this other analytical team, and they're doing that first. Another group started with one or two with one module and a couple of data exports to kind of get their feet under them and try it out for the first 6 to 12 months, kind of get a couple things done. And then once they got the so-called factory in place, right, the factory was built, then they started to bring on modules and data exports and data imports at a pretty high rate and really stand up a bunch of parallel teams to achieve velocity a little later. So yeah, I would say mostly what people start with is different and the core pattern is the same.
Okay, thank you, Damon. Actually, I'm going to direct this one to Gary. I saw a little bit of chatter here on this question. Gary, what API management tool is used?
So actually, I think Damon hit this question. We do not provide an API management tool. We would plug into your API management tool du jour that you're using. So we would be just another feeder into your larger enterprise that would be available inside of those tool sets.
I'll throw this next one to Damon. Damon, what is, and I'll let me read the question and I'll make a comment and then throw it over to Damon. What is the advantage of separating the ODS from the systems integration bid in your mind? And what I will say is, we got this question last time and we sent out an answer. We did of those three states. One of them bought the ODS directly, separate from the SI. One of them went out to a competitive RFP for the platform and the ODS separate than the SI. The third one did include the ODS as part of the SI bid, but ended up procuring from MarkLogic separate from the SI bid. So we have seen it separated in the three instances where we are now working with those states we referenced. So, Damon, what are your thoughts on separating the ODS from the SI?
I'd also like your thoughts, Tom, because you have such a good sense of the business side. From a technical perspective, this is a little geeky, but there's this rule called Godwin's law that how you do your organization is going to kind of cause your software to also be that same structure. So I think that it's a good thing, whether it's in the procurement or the RFIs or just in the team structures, to have the data group and the ODS be a fairly separate project where their responsibility is to think about the big picture and the long term of data and even push back a little bit on another team whose responsibility might be stand up this module by this date. Because it's just human nature. If you're focused on just getting some job done, and especially if it's fixed price, right, just getting it complete and having the payment, it's just almost mentally impossible to keep that real mental focus on long-term good quality data and simplicity when you're racing to get the job done. So I'll just say broadly, I would suggest separating it in a variety of ways, and I'll maybe defer to others to talk about more of the procurement and contracting aspects.
Okay, thank you, Damon. We do have a number of other questions. However, what we did in the last time is we answered those questions. We have all those questions down. We will answer those. We will write them up Today is Tuesday. I think last time we were able to turn them around by early next week. So I do want to thank everybody for attending. I did note that I think about 80% of you were also in the presentation we did earlier in September. And we are looking at a number of topics for the next presentation. So keep a lookout. You'll get answers to your questions. There will be a next presentation in the Medicaid series. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.